Oh, this video is going to be crazy. We got a collaboration with one of, honestly, my favorite YouTubers that I have watched for a very long time. He is way outside the box on a lot of his thinking that has honestly inspired me. That is none other Professor Dungeon Master from Dungeon Craft. That's right, we got the Dungeon Coach and the Dungeon Professor. Professor Dungeon Master, you get the idea. Two people with teaching backgrounds coming together. I asked Professor Dungeon Master, what were the 3 homebrew rules that you would have for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition? He has tons of videos on his channel talking about all the different ways and sometimes issues with certain games and different philosophies and stuff. It's all really good stuff. You should really go check out his channel after this video, of course. But if Professor Dungeon Master plays Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, apart from other games that he plays, if he played 5th edition, what would be the 3 homebrew house rule hacks that he would have to add to his game? And his answers might surprise you. They surprised me. I was not ready for it, but here's how we're going to do this video. I'm going to send it over to Professor Dungeon Master here in a second. He's going to tell you his rule, then I'm going to time him out and I'll give you my breakdown. I'll break it down and give you scenarios where you might want to use this, or different ways you could tweak it so that you would want to use it, or maybe you just don't like it at all. That's some of the favorite stuff I do here on this channel, is give you guys tools and resources to be able to tweak and customize the rules of the game to best fit and have the most fun for you. Take it away, Professor.
Hello, Dungeon Coach. It's Professor Dungeon Master. Thanks for inviting me on. And you asked me to come up with my top 3 hacks. So here they are. The first is don't roll for initiative. Nothing is more momentum killing than the words roll for initiative. It just takes everybody out of the moment. Now we're tossing dice and adding numbers and trying to figure out what order we're going in. And now I'm just sitting around waiting my turn to figure out when I'm going to take my turn. And here's the thing, most characters have dexterity bonuses of some sort anyway because it's such a useful secondary skill. Everyone's got a +1, +2, +3, but the difference between +1 and +2 is only a 5% difference. It just doesn't make a big difference in the scheme of things. Even Critical Role, who are experts, if you watch them, it takes them like 2 minutes to sort out who's going first. I've seen all sorts of trackers, apps, and clothespins on DM screens to figure out who's going next. My solution comes from my friend Wylock at Wylock's Armory. He just says, who threw the first punch? They have the initiative. And then we go clockwise from there. So if I'm playing with Maria, Barbara, Veronica, Michelle, Jean, and Tom is the first one to say, I'm going to punch that orc in the face. He goes first, then it's me, then we go to Barbara. It is so much simpler and faster than bopping around the table trying to figure out who's going to go next. The Game Master already has enough to worry about. Games like Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, RuneQuest, Call of Cthulhu have a static stat called Dexterity or Initiative, and everyone takes their turn from the highest dexterity to the lowest dexterity. And you can do the same thing with Dungeons & Dragons. The highest dexterity goes first, and you sit the players in dexterity order so they can take their turns. It's easy to keep track of. It just makes so much sense, and now that 3 to 18 ability score really has a meaning, and there's a huge difference between a 12, a 14, and a 16. It is so much less confusing for the Game Master and so much faster for everyone involved. It's just my favorite house rule.
Time out, Professor. Here we go. I did not expect that first one coming out from the Professor here. So in general, some of the great points that he made was it's not a big difference of what your dexterity modifier is. So if you have a +1 or a +2, maybe a +3, all the way up to a +5 for some characters, that range does not contribute as much as the D20 itself. The main contributor to this roll is the D20 roll. So with the D20 being the biggest difference maker, your +2 initiative doesn't really matter that much, which is a good point. And the Critical Role example is very prevalent, is how long it takes, especially with a bunch of players. All right, roll for initiative. And then I hate the next moment that happens, right? Whether you're rolling for initiative for the monsters or the players rolling initiative for themselves. No. So I will share with you what I do for initiative, which is a little bit different and maybe a little bit out there. But let me talk about this first. One thing Matt Mercer does in Critical Role is say initiatives in ranges so that you can organize and write it down good, which does help a lot, wrangle the cats. One thing I do at my tables is when I say roll for initiative, my players know it is your responsibility to roll for your initiatives and figure out who's going from first to last between you guys. And then I work my stuff out with the monsters, whether it's me grabbing battle mats, whether it's me setting out minis, whether it's me organizing, whatever it is, right? I have a little bit of a time and they have that time window to roll their dice, add it up, talk to each other and like 22, 14. Okay. So 8. Okay. So it's me. Okay. And then they are ready. I'm like, all right, who's up first? And then they tell me the number. Like, I got a 22. I'm like, all right, cool. Who's next? And they got 14 here. And I can go through and they get themselves ready. This is a responsibility that I give them. And that helps a little bit. It does help a little bit if I'm using a straight up normal initiative. So there's that method. I actually have 3 different initiative methods that I used, but that's just one of them to help out with that. I did also like what he said about going around the table. I think that's very, very clean and very, very organized. I've never tried that, but I almost want to try that, especially for like a one shot or something where we're like, all right, whose characters? And then another thing he talked about was a dexterity order, whoever has the highest initiative, and always doing that. I think that's interesting. I think that could get a little bit lame and repetitive whenever, John always goes first, and it's just always the first one, unless the monster has one and then that's higher, then that might feel a little weird. And, I like the rolling because it adds the variability of who knows type stuff. So, that some of that, I don't know, but I really do like the concept of going around the table, and that's very clean, especially in the context of one shot of just sweeping around the table. It's kind of smooth. And he makes another great point of whoever threw the first punch, that's whoever's going first. So that's interesting. I worry about that with players that are wanting to go first, and I'm in the middle of my villain roleplay speech, and then they just say they shoot them, and I'm like, all right, well, I guess y'all get to go first in initiative now, but then now, so I worry about that. But I really do love the stance he took on it, and I could totally see after seeing so many all of his videos, I totally see him having that stance on it. But one thing I do for initiative that I really, really like is team-based initiative, where the encounter that they're going against has a certain DC, just like you would set a DC for a skill challenge or whatever, and there's a DC. So if they're fighting something and it's a DC 16, and the group rolls initiative, and they can I can either come up with an average group initiative roll for what their average representative is. Somebody rolls and they add the average of their dexterity modifiers. You can do that. It's something you very simply calculate. Maybe if they level up, you might have to recalculate it, or you just have one person, whoever your fastest person is. Sure, you can do however you want to do it as a dungeon master as far as balance and fairness goes. You can do that, and then they roll against that DC. If they beat it, they win and they go first. If they go below it, they fail, and the bad guys go first. And then it's team-based initiative. So once you decide who goes first, the bad guys or the good guys, the players, debatable sometimes, but if the players go, they get to pick 2 people to go, and they go. And then when the bad guys go, one bad guy goes, and then that repeats. If the bad guys win, one bad guy goes, and then 2 players go. One bad guy goes, and then 2 players go. So the players can't, be overwhelmed or feel like it's not fair, because every time it's the player's turn, or the party's turn, they get to pick any 2 players to go, and then as the same thing, the bad guys, I as the dungeon master can pick any bad guys to go. Only disclaimer on that is you can pick groups of bad guys. So if I have the vampire boss and a pack of wolves and 2 henchmen, I can pair them together in those groups and have those groups go. So I have 5 player characters and they win initiative, 2 of them go, okay, cool, and then it's my turn. I'm gonna have the wolves go. So I have the whole pack of wolves go, they rush in or whatever, whether that be for cinematic reasons that I'm choosing in my head or tactical reasons or whatever, and then it's back to the player's turn, 2 of the players go, and then my vampire boss goes, and he goes, and all like that. And then we keep going back and forth until everyone's gone through. And if all the player characters have gone, I finish up with the bad guys, and vice versa, right? And then the next round, same thing happens, but you can choose different people. And then maybe I choose the vampire to go now, and the players don't know that, so they can't account for it. It's really fun. I really do love it. So I just love this collaboration for him to share a rule and me share my rule, and on to the next rule.
My second is use the average monster damage. It's already in the monster stat blocks. Hobgoblins do 5. You could chuck a handful of dice and say, miss, miss, you're hit for 5. Miss, miss, you're hit for 5. And move on with the game. Look, it's fun for the players to calculate their own damage, but it's not fun for the players to sit around waiting while the Game Master does computations for 5 or 6 separate monsters or attacks. And I've spoken to people who used to work at Wizards of the Coast and have play-tested various editions of Dungeons & Dragons, and I can confirm that is what they do. They just use the average damage for the monster. When I suggested this on my show, Dungeon Craft, some people said, well, that puts the players at a disadvantage because the monsters are always always doing this median damage, but the players can do a minimal damage or a maximum damage. It's called average damage for a reason. If you roll an 8-sided die, it might come up 1 or 8, but if you roll it 100 times, you're going to get 4.5. The average first level fighter can take 3 hits before they're reduced to negative hit points, and other classes can survive about 2 before they go down. That's the way the game has always been designed, and average damage helps the game master just move things along so much faster and keep it focused on the players. That's why your players are at the game. They don't want to see you do math.
I gotta say, Professor, I love this one. Now, I'm a little biased on this because in the new tabletop roleplay game I'm creating, DC 20 RPG, which I am going to be playing with you here soon, Professor. But in DC 20 RPG, you do not roll for damage. I have a whole video that I will link down in the description on how damage is dealt in DC 20, but the damage is tied to your attack roll. So you make your attack roll, and if you have a really high attack roll, you deal high damage. Basically, it's the base damage and +1 for every 5 you beat the armor class by. So you beat the armor class by 10, and you deal 2 bonus damage every single. So it's a cool way of having quick and efficient combat, so you're not having to stop and roll for damage. And trust me, in all the different playtesting I've done for DC 20, it's not that crazy of a thing to not roll for damage anymore. And with what the professor's saying is flat damage, especially if you just do flat damage for monsters only, it's really easy for the dungeon master just to roll the flat damage for monsters and keeps things going and let the players still roll the dice if they want. And the professor talked about already how it's averages. So if the players, I would say players like rolling for damage in that way, sure, let them. They will roll high sometimes and low sometimes, but they'll still average out over the course of a campaign. And another solution that I've done for this is I have done this before with to speed up things for monsters, is I've had a monster deal 4 damage plus 1d4. So it wasn't always the same, because one issue that I do have with this is if monsters always deal the same exact damage, there's a lot of metagaming that can go on where, oh, this monster only hits for 4 damage. I have 5 health. I can take another hit and be okay. That feels bad, right? So I have tried this before, but when I've tried it, I had the goblin deals 2 damage plus a d4, or the big huge guy deals 8 damage plus a d4. You know what I'm saying? So whatever number you set, subtract about 2 or so from that and add a d4 onto it, and that gives you a little bit of variability for that d4. But overall, I do love this rule because it is what I'm using in DC 20 RPG, because it's just so quick. You deal the damage, you know you hit, you dealt this much damage, you describe what happened, and you keep going. Again, if you want my whole rant on why damage dice isn't as fun to roll as you think it is, that's in the description. On to the third rule.
And my third and possibly most controversial house rule, and why I'm wearing my +2 vest of protection, is on a natural 1, a complication might occur. I don't call it a fumble or a botch. I call it a complication. I have the player roll the 20-sided die a second time. Now, on an 11 to 20, nothing happens. They almost drop their weapon, but recover it at the last second. On a 1 to 10, they drop their weapon. On a natural 1, they may break their weapon or lose it. Like if you're fighting on a bridge over a bottomless chasm and you roll a natural 1 followed by another natural 1, there goes your +5 Holy Avenger. If players have multiple attacks and several of them are successful and then they roll a 1, I might say something like, well, you kill the ogre, but your sword gets lodged in its rib cage and wrenched out of your hand. I've gotten lots of blowback on this rule by people saying, well, that disproportionately affects fighters because they will roll a 1 more often. To which I respond, yeah, that's why they have multiple weapons proficiencies. That's why knights had squires in the Middle Ages, so that they could hand them different weapons. A weapon like a mace was used for close quarter fighting. Like if you were in a battle and you were in the front rank, it's easier to club someone over their head. Once the ranks get thinned out and the combatants start spreading out, that's when you would take out your sword. Just look at swords and axes in museums. Look at the number of notches in them. That's the kind of punishment swords took in battle, and it was common for them to get damaged or broken. And consider this, when a character attacks, it's not a single attack. They're not just trading blows back and forth. In a single round, a fighter might be making 6, 8, or even 10 strokes. Over the course of 20 rounds, that's 200 blows. What's the chance that the fighter will be disarmed, drop their weapon, or it could get stuck in something in 200 blows? probably pretty good. Some players don't like this rule because, to be honest with you, they always want to win. But the fact is, in war, a lot of times things go wrong, and I find complications can make things really interesting. Just think of the movies you've seen where a hero is disarmed and they have to pick up something and use it as an improvised weapon. That's not bad, it's cool, and it's what fighters do.
I gotta say, I love this one too because I am a sucker for nat 20s and nat 1s. They mean so much to me. I fully believe that nat 20s should be crazy and awesome and epic, and I believe nat 1 should be terrible and horrible and not fun and not good, right? And I almost said not fun, but the professor exactly hit it out of the park there with bad, crazy things that happen to your character. Those are some of the craziest, coolest moments in movies, in the game, where something terrible happens and you have to overcome it or come up with an idea of what's to happen now, like a natural 1 and, oh no, like my weapon's gone, or this is gone, or I fell down, or whatever's going on, right? Now, I do think that it can feel bad if every single nat 1 is punished in some terrible way or some goofy way where the character slips and falls or does something stupid that makes the character feel dumb. You don't want to do that, right? So in general, also with this rule that he proposed is when you roll a nat 1, you roll another d20 to like check for it, almost like old school D&D where you had to roll to confirm a crit, but it's almost like confirming a negative, which I guess is better because it's protecting you from having it too bad of a thing happen. But you roll that d20, an 11 to 20, nothing happens. So 50% of your natural 1s won't have any sort of bad things happen. No big deal. And then 2 to 10, you drop your weapon. That's really not that big of a deal. And a natural 1, it breaks. Ooh, dang, that's kind of crazy. Just the fact that these types of rules are on the table, I think is cool. Putting rules like this on the table, mathematically, they might not ever happen. It's just the fact that it's there is kind of cool. My version of this, my version of what I normally do with this is my players just know natural 1s, something bad, if something bad could happen, it will. So in general, natural 20, I dive into those. Crazy stuff happens on natural 20s that might not ever happen in these big, huge moments. And I, as a dungeon master, dive into those. And the opposite is true. Natural 1s, I dive into those as well because I want that spectrum to be very dynamic in the two extreme ends. So on a natural 1, if you're standing next to an ally and somebody misses or whatever, and there's some sort of a super sketchy situation and you get a natural 1 on that attack and it was on the table that you almost could be hitting something else, yeah, you're gonna maybe roll that. Your ally might have to make a dexterity saving throw, or I would apply your attack roll to their armor, or I'd tell you to re-roll the attack against them and see if it hits them. And oh no, right? So I do love to add complications to natural 1s. I don't have it laid out as cleanly as the professor does here with his little chart here, and it very, very clean on what exactly happens in these little ranges. For me, if a natural 1 happens, it's a feeling at the table, whether it be the combat, whether it be whatever, and that's a pulse check. I'm sorry, I can't give you exactly what I do because I don't have a system for it. I just know the pulse check on my table. I know the pulse check of my party members, and if things are super tense and everything's super on the edge, I might not like, oh, it's a natural 1. Okay, natural 1, it misses, and we keep going. If there's a cinematic moment for it, if there's a plot reason, if there's some sort of crazy build up to where a natural 1's crazy or a natural 20's crazy, I dive into those moments and have some crazy stuff happen where the spell does something different, or something catches on fire, or somebody falls prone, or something breaks. Sure. Oh man, I just get so excited talking to other people about their versions of rules. Oh.
All right, Coach, those are my house rules. What do you think?
I think this was super fun, and we should do it again, and I cannot wait to play DC 20 RPG with you because a lot of the principles that I believe in have came from you in your videos.
Thanks again, Coach, for having me on, and I look forward to seeing all of you out there on my channel, Dungeon Craft.
Yes, go check out his channel. I'm telling you guys, he's outside the box thinker like we are here, and I really have loved a lot of the stuff he's talked about with health and a lot of things. And honestly, the principles in DC 20 RPG, a lot of them you can see some of the inspiration that come from the professor. Things about health being too high in Dungeons and Dragons that need to be scaled down a little bit. Things of being faster paced, different things having to do with initiative like we talked about in the beginning. So a huge thank you to you, Professor, for doing this little collaboration with me here on this channel. It's honestly crazy for me to do any sort of collaboration with people who I watched before I started my own YouTube channel, and the professor is one of the best. And in Alcander's Almanac, the professor is also cited and listed. I'll show you this piece of art here. He is Deathbringer is sitting at the table in Alcander's Almanac because the Alcander's Almanac, the expansion for 5th edition, also has huge inspiration from the professor in all of his videos. So go check him out, show him some love from the Dungeon Crew, and with the professor, stay thinking outside the box. Peace.